Welcome to the Happy Doc. My name is Taylor Brana, a fourth-year medical student and your host. This show is inspired by a simple idea. I think we all have the human capability of being happy in any field of work we are passionate about. Specifically in the world of medicine, there's a growing idea that medicine isn't what it used to be, that there is less and less joy in the practice of this beautiful field whose goal is to help others. As a medical student, I refuse to believe my future as a doctor is mediocre at best. With this mindset, I have launched the Happy Doc, an audio series where I will interview current happy practicing physicians to find out their journey, their tips and tricks, their mindset, and much more to find out what has allowed them to succeed in such a demanding field. Please get your weekly dose of the Happy Doc and gain insight, tools, and strategies to cultivate your inner happiness. Hello. Welcome. This is Taylor Brana, and this is the first episode of the Happy Doc. I have with us our first physician and guest, Mark Leeds. He's a family practice physician. He began his residency in 1999. He's currently practicing in Florida. And I don't want to prolong the introduction too much, so Mark, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, I'm Mark Leeds. I'm an osteopathic physician, and I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That's where I practice right now. I grew up here, and I went to osteopathic medical school in Des Moines, Iowa, starting in 1992, and I went to residency in Miami from 96 to 99, and I've been working here ever since. And currently I'm in my own practice near the beach in Fort Lauderdale, and I do family medicine, and we focus on also treating addiction to opioids, and it's a very rewarding practice, enjoying that, and that's it.
Amazing. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being here. It's great. I asked you if you felt like you were a happy physician, and you said yes. And, that's not, the norm. So I'm really very grateful to have you. And essentially, we're just going to structure this. I'm going to ask you some questions and kind of get to know your practice a little bit better and, your mindset and some of your tips and your tricks. So let's head on into some questions here. So Mark, why did you start medicine in the beginning? In the first place?
My father was a family practice physician, so I grew up around it. He used to take us on rounds to the hospital. We spent time in his office. I worked for him during the summers. So I grew up around the medical field. I grew up around osteopathic medicine, family medicine. So it was a natural thing to go into the field. And my father definitely encouraged me. I had some other ideas of things that I considered doing. I was very interested in computer science and programming. I had some interest in music during college, but it was natural for me to go right from college into medical school. I applied. I mainly only applied to osteopathic medical schools. I had no interest in being an MD, so I applied here in Florida and Iowa. And I ended up going to Iowa, and it was great there.
Fantastic. Just to describe the difference a little bit, for other listeners out there, could you explain the difference between allopathic or MD versus DO osteopathic medicine?
Yeah, they're very similar. As DOs, we tend more to go into family medicine. Not that we're required to. We're licensed and allowed to do any kind of medicine, any kind of surgery, if we're trained and choose to do that. But we do consider the whole person, and we're also trained in osteopathic manipulation, which is treating the spine and the tissues as far as you could probably actually give a better description right now of.
That's fine. Yeah, and I'm also an osteopathic. I'm in an osteopathic school as well, and Yeah, I think that pretty much captures it. We learn how to take care of the whole person, and with the osteopathic manipulative treatment, it's another course where we can use these hands-on techniques to treat the person in another modality, which isn't available if you just went to MD schools. And I have spoken to a lot of MDs who actually wish they learned these techniques because otherwise, you just have the ability to, give patients medication and your personality, but then you don't have that other skill of putting your hands on the person, laying on the hands, and being able to, if they have any somatic or body complaints, being able to treat them in that way. So it's a great way it's a different perspective and an additional technique. So for the listeners out there, that's kind of the main difference. So that's great, Mark. So I'm just going to dig in a little bit here. Can you explain a little bit your journey in terms of your journey through medical school and as an intern and as a resident? How was that experience for you?
It was difficult. I mean, it was fun and difficult at the same time. Um, I mean, it's been a while now since being in medical school. I enjoyed going to Iowa. I enjoyed the season changes and the weather, which we don't really have much of in South Florida. It's kind of warm or hot all year round here, and it's a different different kind of place living in Des Moines, Iowa for a couple of years. But yeah, I actually enjoy studying. I enjoy taking exams. I usually do pretty well, but it's tough. Actually, for me, it was more difficult once we got past the first 2.5 years. When I was there, they were still doing 2.5 years of classroom work, and then it was a year and a half of clinical rotations, and and that's where it kind of got difficult because we're at the mercy of these doctors that evaluate us, and some of them are not happy in their own careers, and they can be pretty tough on students and their expectations, and when you're with a specialist, they often they expect you to be up to their standards, and it could be tough. I mean, there's some great rotations and some really great doctors that I studied with, and I'll always remember them and some of the things they taught me. And then there are some that I'd rather not remember. But it was pretty tough. And I probably didn't have nearly the hardest experience either. I've heard of much worse. I've heard I think even more recently to the point of being considered human rights abuses of people being kept awake for days on end, and not being able to use the bathroom. Things weren't that bad for me, really. Actually, my internship and residency, I did at a small osteopathic hospital in Miami, and that was actually pretty good. We learned a lot. The clinics got busy. I think the last 2 years when they had me working in the clinic, one of the clinics got to be busy to the point where the doctor, the attending in charge of us, couldn't keep up with the patients, and we couldn't keep up with them, and things got a little bit stressful there. But otherwise, overall, it wasn't as bad as what I've heard from other people.
Well, that's great. I mean, overall, it sounds like, given the circumstances, you were able to cope with it pretty well. And in comparison, you described the fact that it wasn't as bad as what you've heard from other people. What for you during the process, you mentioned like human rights abuse. What during the process for you, did you feel like there was any time where the the education and the training, did you feel like there was a time where this isn't fair and no individual or human should undergo this kind of process? Did you personally feel like that?
Um, I would say I experienced that more in work after residency. Um,
Mm.
when you finish residency, they don't teach us a lot about how to work on our own and how to start our own practice. So people look for jobs when they graduate. Um, or you look for, maybe to work at a place that you spent time at on a rotation.
Hmm.
And the work after, got really difficult. I mean, I worked in a what I would consider to be an abusive large practice.
Hmm.
I had patients yelling at me. I was overbooked. We were expected to be competitive. At one point, the office manager put a scoreboard on in the back office, and would keep tally up the patients we were seeing, and we were expected to be competitive, and
Wow.
we're reprimanded if we were at the low end and not seeing enough patients. Um,
Wow.
I was yelled at, in front of patients and staff and threatened to be fired.
Mm.
And it was, it was abusive. I thought, I mean, for a job, it was, I think, as bad as things can get in that respect. I mean, of course, outside of the medical field, there's abusive jobs and difficult jobs, but it's demeaning to be, you walk into a room and people are screaming at you or saying that, you're not the doctor I wanted to see, or, you have doctors undermining each other and, telling patients, that they don't agree with treatment, and threatening each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, in those kind of situations where you're thrown into when you're thrown into a situation where you can't possibly see all the patients you're expected to in a day, and give enough time to everyone, and then in between, and during your lunchtime and in the morning and after work, you have charts to work on, patients to call back, and it just gets to be overwhelming and almost impossible to give enough time to everybody and to keep up with everything.
Right. So just to get a better understanding, on your worst day, and again, I do realize this will be your worst day, how many patients were you like expected to see um, in during your hours, or how quickly did you have to go through patients? And kind of, can you paint the picture of what the worst day would have been like during that process?
Yeah, and again, it was. I know that there's people that have been through worse. I've heard that there's areas that doctors are expected to see 50 patients a day. I've had those days where I've seen 50 patients in a day, but that wasn't typical. For us, it was more typical in an 8-hour day to see 30 to 35,
Mm-hmm.
and and you get to you get to be used to like kind of rushing people through and finding ways to get out of the room. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as far as someone starts talking a lot and you order a test and tell them you'll be back, and then we would have these flags on the door to pull a flag out and put up a lab requisition, and there's just unfortunately just ways that you just have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
If a person is going to take more than 5 minutes, we were scheduled every 15 minutes, but then they would double book us, so you really might have only 5 to 10 minutes or even less in some cases. And
Wow.
yeah, it just and I actually heard that in a lecture once. Someone saying, what's the most common reason to order a CBC? And it's to buy yourself time.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, that's horrible and hilarious at the same time. So let me ask you now this next following question, which is, obviously you described these time periods where you're seeing patients in 5 to 10 minutes. If you're truly having an ideal practice, how much time do you think you need to offer a patient per initial visit versus like a, sort of a progress visit or follow-up visit?
Ideally, I would say 45 minutes to an hour. Um,
Hmm.
I can imagine in some cases you might want more. Sometimes I don't always get all the information I need on the initial visit, and
Hmm.
I've called patients and had phone discussions with them, and I thought of more questions I want to ask them. When you have a smaller practice and you have less patients and you get to know your patients, you sometimes you fill in the information as you go along, and that even if you spend 45 minutes on your initial consultation, it may over time add up to more than that, because you have an ongoing dialogue with that patient. You get to know them. I may have further discussions or ask them to come back within a few days. And, it's important. I mean, even if we really actually even got the full 15 minutes we were supposed to get in that big clinic experience, there's always the pressure of that next patient and then the next one. And
Right.
it's so many different people. You don't really get to know them. I mean, but yeah, I would say 45 minutes to an hour, ideally. And, for some doctors in different kinds of practices, even more time might be beneficial.
Right. And the fact of the matter is you're a family physician, which at the core of being a family physician is family and the ability to understand that individual and know them. And you really like, I mean, it doesn't make sense. And I don't think anyone would disagree with me that you can't really get to know someone in 5 to 10 minutes while rushing to ask a bunch of questions. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty terrible with that sort of system, to be even able to really care for your patients effectively. Now I wanted to switch gears here and talk about kind of, where we're at now. So first off, what qualifies to you as being happy? What does happiness mean to you?
Um, well, I don't think anybody should expect to be constantly happy all the time. I mean, maybe that's possible, but I don't think people should feel like they're not living up to their potential because they don't constantly feel happy. I think even the most successful people that are doing what they love doing, have their downtime and, but I feel happy when, I'm working on something that I love doing and, and I'm, free to some extent. I mean, there's, relative happiness also as far as, if I think to back to how bad things were, working in some of these busy clinics, I mean, being grateful is a form of happiness. I'm very grateful to think back to how I couldn't take time off. I couldn't, or if I had to take time off, it was a huge task to schedule and figure out how things are going to work out. And then the worst part was coming back from time off, whether it was for a vacation or sick time, or something I had to do with my family. The next day I came back was going to be a nightmare because all those patients that I wasn't able to see, some of them might be seen by a covering doctor, but often I was expected to see, all the people that I had missing, and the day coming back from vacation or time off was, a nightmare. And so just remembering those days and realizing that I don't have to do that anymore. I'm happy just being grateful for that.
That's fantastic. So what are you doing currently, and what does your day look like now?
Things are pretty easygoing. I drop off the children at school in the morning, and then come back home, and I'm never really not working. I'm kind of on call all the time. I always have my phone with me. I use Google Voice for my phone system, so I can have it. I can have the phones forwarded to multiple phones. You can, I think you can have up to like 50 different phones ringing. I don't do that, but I have like 2 or 3 possibly, or just one. Patients can always get in touch with me. But things are pretty quiet because I try, I've had situations in the past where it seemed like, patients were angry about the clinic and the way things worked, and they would call all hours of the night sometimes, or something wasn't taken care of during the day, so they would call in the middle of the night knowing that there was an on-call doctor that they could talk to. I don't really get those calls in the middle of the night anymore. So I used to. Well, we also had hospital. I mean, I'm going a little bit off topic here, off a little, but yeah, when I was working for the big clinic, we would get hospital admissions. I don't really do those anymore. That was difficult, waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and, hearing all the sounds of the ER in the background. They need orders right away to get a patient out of the ER and up onto the floor. And that's something that, at some point you have to deal with as a residency. And, if you want to do, work in the hospitals, but you have your choice when you have your own practice. You don't have to do that. So yeah, I don't get that many calls, but I get calls from new patients, people that want to schedule an appointment. In some cases, if there's not any kind of medical information involved, we can actually handle scheduling through a text message. If somebody, wants to see if they can come in, they send me a message, and I'll tell them, that's great, and I put them on the schedule. Mm-hmm. And some people email me. So I'll drop the kids off. I'll come home, take a little bit of time at home, and I can go sit out in the patio and relax it a little bit. And then, and when we might work from 10 to 2, our hours are flexible. If I don't have appointments, and, sometimes I won't even go into the office. I'll, just do other things, work on other projects. But if we have patients scheduled, or if I just want to go work at the office and be there, we'll be there from 10 to 2. Then I'll go pick up the kids after, mm-hmm. from school. And, so the office hours are very easy, so it's Monday through Friday, 10 to 2, but I don't always go in every day. So some, weeks we may only work 2 or 3 days. Some weeks we may work 5 days a week.
Right. Now, well, first off, I want to say, as a medical student, to hear that a physician is working, 4 hours a day, or some days taking some time off, that's like literally a dream for us, because, the lives we're seeing are very busy physicians that probably come in before 7 o'clock and leave close to 7 or after 7, easily 12-hour days, if not more.
Yeah.
Working weekends and, working overnight shifts and things of that nature. So, just for the listeners, I mean, think of the fact that it is possible to work extremely less hours and still, Mark is able to spend time with his family and, take his kids to school and things of that nature. Whereas within a system where you're employed and you're constantly under pressure, like that might not be the case. So it's really, really great to get that perspective. Mark, could you explain a little bit of how you went through the process of figuring out you wanted to open up your own practice and what, the difficulties in that, and can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, this is actually my second time around. And the first time around, I made a lot of mistakes, and definitely learned from that first attempt. Mm-hmm. I worked at my job after residency from 1999 through 2005, and I hadn't really made any definite plans to quit, but I wanted to quit the whole time. Mm-hmm. I actually got a small condo right near the office because I wanted to be able to go home if I could during lunch breaks. And it was so depressing working there. I used to go, I'd go straight home as soon as I could leave, and I would just go right to sleep, and I sleep right through the night until the morning, till I had to go back. I just couldn't even get out of bed. It was pretty bad. So I had done a few things, planning to leave, and at one point I bought this machine, this hair removal machine. I got an ad for it. And it was really a big mistake. I just imagined, doing some kind of like home visits or part-time work, doing hair removal and skin treatments. Okay. And the machine worked okay. It wasn't great for hair removal, but it did these facial skin treatments, got pretty good results. But, I didn't know anything about marketing and how to get patients at that time. And honestly, it wasn't very fun to use the machine. It, gave me a headache and, flashing lights over and over again. Wow. And, and it was very expensive. I mean, the machine was $30,000. So it was, it's like buying a luxury car, and, you can't drive it. And then the only way for me to pay for it was to get their lease deal, which I think it ended up being $45,000.
Wow.
It was like,
did you make any money doing this service, or was it a complete blowout?
I made a little money. I still have the machine in a closet somewhere. At one point I remember I had one patient that came in every single week for hair removal. We were doing a full body treatment, and we would do, large areas during lunchtime for like an hour once or twice a week.
Right.
It was okay. I mean, he was a nice guy. We talked, but, at one point he started complaining that it wasn't working as well as he expected.
Huh.
And, and the light was giving me a headache. Instead of being able to work on my charts or whatever during lunchtime or even eat lunch, I was sitting in a little room, flashing this light over and over again, trying to remove hair.
Right.
At one point I figured out that the machine actually worked really good for women's facial hair. So I did a kind of an inexpensive upper lip mustache treatment. And,
Okay.
I had a few faithful patients coming in for that. A few people really liked the full facial treatment with the, I forgot what they called it, but it was like I don't even remember what the treatment was called, but
Okay.
it was like a separate arm of the machine, and it would, kind of refresh the skin, and, the top layer would come off, and, everything, it looked good,
Yeah.
gave people kind of a youthful appearance. And,
Now, did you actually like doing this type of work, or was it just something you were trying to figure out for?
No, that was a mistake. That machine.
Okay.
And I kind of learned my lesson. When I see people, planning out their practices and their clinics of what they're going to do, and when I hear people talking about buying big expensive machines, and I just see it as a mistake. I mean, maybe there's people who are better at marketing that kind of thing than I am, but it's very expensive, and the thing is, it's hard to market. I mean, especially where I am right now, in South Florida. I mean, everybody's doing cosmetic treatments.
Right.
Everybody has these machines, and you can't possibly keep up with it. If you get a machine, someone else is going to have a newer and better machine.
Gotcha.
That I just think that those kind of, I mean, that's really, kind of leads to the next big mistake that I made. So in 2005, I actually finally got an opportunity. I think I got that machine a little bit before then, and there was a nearby dermatologist that was retiring. He had I think he had a heart condition, so he was going to go out on disability, but
Okay.
he had a busy hair transplant practice, so he needed somebody to take over doing the surgery part, and he had a whole team of technicians, and his medical, or actually his office manager, I used to see her father as a patient, and she was really happy with the way that I spent time with him, and in the middle of the busy office, I mean, I think I took like probably 30 to 45 minutes with him, maybe even longer. We just sat and talked for a long time.
Oh, wow.
He had dementia, he had diabetes, and a lot of other problems, and he was sitting in a mess of an apartment, not really knowing what to do with himself.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I really had any good solutions for him, but I was trying to help. So honestly, in some of those kind of cases, I don't remember, but sometimes when I would spend a lot of time with a patient talking to them, I was really escaping the torture of working in the clinic. Kind of locking myself in a
Right.
room to get away from everybody.
Hmm.
I don't remember if that was a situation there, but I guess she was happy with the way that I treated her father, and when they were looking for a doctor, she thought of me. So, it
Wow.
was kind of a great opportunity that just came out of something unexpected. Um,
Right.
so the first time I actually turned them down, I said, I'm not really comfortable doing that kind of surgery. I mean, I know how to do suturing and, minor procedures, but, I was just intimidated by it. And, so I think my being intimidated made them, uncomfortable with hiring me.
Hmm.
But a few months later, I think they hadn't found anybody, so they came back around to me, and that time I said, I'm just going to tell them I can do it. Just I'll figure it out. So I just kind of jumped in, and it turned out to be fun. I mean, it was really enjoyable. Working with the team and doing my part. With the suturing and the cutting, and
Yeah.
it was actually a lot of fun. So I did that for a while, and that kind of gave me that opportunity to pull away from the other practice.
Okay. So you kind of phased out a little bit or shifted.
Yeah, I mean, I was intending to keep both jobs, and the other job wasn't very accommodating. They didn't really like the fact that I had a second job.
Hmm.
So things were getting difficult running back and forth between the two, and one day I just realized, I mean, I don't need two incomes from two jobs, I was doing well enough with the hair transplant practice.
Right.
So, so I just gave up my main job, which was kind of a scary thing for me. But I'm like, I just can't do it anymore. And now I can, and so, that was great. I mean, for a while, I had a few months where, I mean, the hair transplant work is like, the doctor does, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes, you talk to the patient, you do the removing of the donor strip, and then the technicians work for a very long time. And I would go back in and supervise and leave, but there was a lot of downtime where I could kind of sit in a room and read, and and we would do 1 or 2 cases a day, so it wasn't really that busy.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that was really fun for a while, but within less than a year of me starting that, they wound down. The group wasn't getting along together. Or actually, the owner and the advertising people weren't getting along. So, we talked about continuing and moving somewhere else, but I was getting worried that whole thing was going to fall apart, and I had given up my main job.
Right.
So, in 2006, actually a little bit before that, I started looking around for my own office.
Okay.
And actually, my original intention was to continue on my own with the hair transplant practice. I was imagining that, I can figure out how to order all this stuff and, set up the surgery room.
Right. You've seen it so many times and you've been practicing, so. Yeah.
And I had some help also. I had, people advising me on, where to order everything from and who to talk to as far as technicians. So I, finally found a location. And this is the next big mistake. The rent was, it was a busy corner. I kind of imagined that the, being located there would be good. People would see my sign and,
right.
Drive by and, walk in. But the rent was like $3,000 a month.
Wow. Okay.
And that was with a 3-year lease. So I was obligating myself to pay $3,000 a month in rent.
Right. For 3 years.
Yeah, for 3 years. And, the way I justified it was, well, that's $100 a day. And, when we get busy enough, even seeing a few patients, we'll make enough money to pay the $100 a day. But,
right.
It's really a lot. I mean, it was a mistake.
Especially starting out.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, if, for someone that wants to have, what you might call a micro practice, just, one doctor, seeing a few patients, small number of patients and being able to give them enough time, you really want to keep overhead low. I mean, maybe at some point, as your practice grows and over time, you might find ways to finance a bigger practice or get into other things. But, spending money early on and having a high overhead is like the biggest mistake you can make.
So, so your recommendation, for anyone who's interested in branching out and opening up their own practice, to really start with as little overhead as possible and don't invest too much before you have a following or a set of patients. Yeah.
I mean, if you go to these conventions, and conferences where they have, where you can get your CME credits in person, go to lectures, they always have that room where they have all the drug companies and, people selling equipment and selling medical services and machines. And, when you walk by, they tell you how you can make money, if you buy their machine and you pay it off. And,
okay. I'm not aware of this. I haven't been to one of these conferences, but
yeah, I mean, it's pretty common. You see tons of machines and, and they tell you how you can make money, how Medicare or whatever insurances will pay for them. And, the one thing that they never tell you is, where you're going to get these patients from.
Right.
So it's really, most of these things are things that cost you money and they most likely won't make any money for you. They're not going to pay for themselves. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like they're just like selling the dream, so to speak, but they're not telling you how are you actually going to find these people who are going to give you the money and be able to use the machine. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have, so those are things to avoid, high rent, buying machines and buying equipment. I would say, office equipment, you can find cheap office equipment. You can find doctors retiring, hospitals have sales, You can get creative with some things. At one point, I was using a massage table. I think I got it at Costco, and it was pretty cheap. It was a folding massage table, and it worked as well as anything. Another thing to look out for is debt. You also find a lot of people want to lend doctors money.
Right.
Second mortgages, unsecured loans. I mean, you get things in the mail all the time, saying that you've qualified for a loan. I would avoid those at all costs. I've done things like that, and then struggled to have to pay them back.
And so this leads to one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which is, looking back at your entire journey, what are some key things you would have told yourself 10, 20 years ago before you went down this road of medicine and wanting to create your own practice?
Oh, I mean, yeah, going back as far as possible, I would have told myself, save every penny. Don't spend money on pointless things. I would have eaten out less, gone out less, bought less phones and computers and garbage. I mean that when you especially when you come out of residency and you get a job, it seems like you're making a lot of money, and you might get the feeling like, well, I could do this job forever, and just keep making money. And then you see when you go into the doctor's parking lot at a hospital, you see some very nice cars there,
sure.
And people live in nice big houses. You just really have to be careful with that, because working in a lot of these jobs is almost like slavery, and you're kind of giving up your freedom when you're not careful with your finances.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. I mean, now in my generation, and the students going to med school now, the loan debt is even higher, and with inflation, I mean, I think residents now are making as much as they did back when you how much was the salary that you received as an intern or a resident?
I don't remember exactly, but I remember it was around $30,000 a year, which I think
$30,000.
So, and at that time that was high. That was pretty competitive, and they'd figured out a way to. They split it up with I think $1,000 a month of that was for housing.
Okay. So for us, I think it's somewhere between 45 to like 55 in general for most fields, but I think with inflation, that actually comes out to being less than it would have been for when you trained. So,
yeah, probably. I can't imagine, especially if someone had children, you can't really support a family. I mean, where I live right now, that would almost be like poverty level if you had to support a family on that.
Yeah, and I'm personally lucky. I don't have, I take care of myself, but yeah, any individual who has like a family, I mean, that's, makes it much more difficult. With just moving forward, what would be your biggest tip to those who want to join the healthcare industry or healthcare field?
You mean as far as making the decision to, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and as far as so to any of the pre-med students that might be listening, what would you say to a pre-medical student that wants to join into medicine looking back on everything?
I would say make sure that it's something that you really want to do, that something that you love doing. There's it's a relatively easy field in the sense that if you like school and you like studying and you like taking exams and you're good at that, I mean, you can get through it. But like if you think about what kind of books do you keep around your house, what do you like to read? When you go to the news, I mean, now now they have Google News. I mean, they didn't have much of an internet back when I was in school, but right. When I go to Google News now, I find myself reading technology news, science news. If you're the kind of person that you jump straight to the health news, or even more so, you have medical journals laying around your house and you kind of pick them up just to see what's new, or you get excited about looking at articles in the new recent medical journals when they come in. If you read medical textbooks at night for fun, if you really enjoy it, if you really enjoy discussing cases, but I wouldn't do it just as something to do for a secure career and job, unless you really, really love it.
Right.
Especially now. I mean, it was difficult when I got into it, and I think it's gotten more difficult. So I would say make sure you really love the healthcare field.
Right. So to summarize, you're saying if someone's naturally gravitating towards reading these medical journals and loves, going out of their way to learn health and well-being and all those types of things in the realm of medicine, then that is a pretty good indicator that, the going into medicine would be, for them. However, if that's not their natural draw, they might want to, consider, exploring other options.
Yeah, I mean it's not easy, and it takes a lot of years, a lot of your life to get to the point where you can work, and then it's not easy to get a job or to build your own practice. I mean, a lot of people get don't hear the kind of things that we're talking about, and kind of get diverted into the easiest path or the most straightforward path of going through residency and getting a job at a place that they did a rotation at, and you can end up being 30, 40, and 50 years old or 60 years old, and looking back and saying, I wish I had done something totally different.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it's a big choice and dedication, and then if it's not what you end up wanting to do, you end up with so much loan debt if you're not, if you don't have a wealthy family or scholarship, that it is difficult to switch. So I can completely agree with you there.
Yeah, and when I was in school, I don't think we had this issue with not having enough residency spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I know for some residencies it was competitive, but for family practice, the residencies were coming after us. I mean, they were fighting over students, and
right.
I can't even imagine being in that situation where thousands of medical students every year are not getting a residency spot.
Right. Yeah, now it's the case where we're definitely, feeling the pressure of having to compete with one another, which is also horrible in its own way because, as you know, medicine is a collaborative sport, and it's not you're not supposed to be fighting with your fellow peers and physicians and healthcare practitioners because that's not helping the patient. So it's kind of driving this competitiveness. I mean, here's my perspective, that it's driving this competitiveness that doesn't really need to be there. So yeah, it's really changing the field, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think is a common crime or mistake that you see other students or residents or attendings making on their journey with medicine?
Common mistakes that they make?
Yeah. Is there any kind of like crime or something that they're doing that do you see any of these possible things that you've learned through your practicing that you now feel is just not the correct move to make?
I would imagine that this is probably happening now, and I know my father had warned me about it. Of going into a medical field just for the money. I remember my father telling me a story about some friends of his in school that were going to go into urology and only for the money. That apparently urology was paying really well, and
okay.
They were excited that they got into their residency and not that they were excited about urology, and he was thinking to himself, do they realize what they're committing themselves to for their next, for the rest of their lives, probably,
right.
Just for money.
Right.
And, so I mean, and I'm sure there's people that love urology, but,
Sure.
People that love every field, but, you should never, within the medical field, just commit yourself to doing something for money. I mean, if you love family medicine, I mean, family medicine has a reputation of maybe not being the highest paying field, but, you have a lot of flexibility. You can do a lot of things. And, some of these other specialties, if it turns out that it's not for you, you might find yourself at a point in your career where you can't you can't just go and do what you want. You've been trained to do a certain specialty, and
Right.
family medicine, you can kind of reinvent yourself and decide this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm not going to do.
Right.
But you shouldn't make choices in what you're going to do, even going into the medical field, and especially within the medical field of making those decisions based on money.
Right. And I completely agree. And you know, let's give the example of urology and just say that all of a sudden there is something that comes out that, helps a lot of patients, or there's less of a drive or pool of patients to see, and you're in the specialized field that you only did for money, and now you're not even making money. Like, you might as well do what you love. And, whether obviously money is a consideration because we need to take care of ourselves and our families, but I do agree that money being the sole reason you go into something is not the way to live your life. So I can definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and talking about having the freedom to start your own practice and see the kind of patients that you want to see and reinvent yourself. Being in some of these specialties, it might not be as easy. Being in areas of primary care, maybe psychiatry, pediatrics. You can, I think more easily choose what you want to do and what kind of patients you want to see. But
Right.
if you're in a specialty where you depend on referrals from other doctors, and it may not be as easy to have your own practice.
Right.
So I would consider that also that going into some specialties, it might be more difficult to pull away from working for other people.
Right. And that's not to say, and I mean, I'm sure you agree that it's not good to be a specialist, but as we just spoke about, you really have to love it. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I might also, being a DO, like I said, I think most of us tend to go into family medicine. So I might be biased in that sense, that it just seemed, and that's what my father did, so it seemed natural for me.
Sure. And I do think it really does come down to loving what you're doing, and in this case, and it is nice with the general fields, the fact, like you said, like you can kind of, you might see this type of patient for a couple of years, and then you're like, what, I don't feel like doing that sort of treatment anymore. I want to work with these sets of patients, and that is nice to have the ability to switch things up.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to ask you, what is the best advice you've received from a mentor?
There's been a lot of people over the years that have given advice that stuck with me and had an impact, and I don't always remember who it was. There was a woman doctor that gave us a lecture when I was a resident, a really good lecture. But what I remember is that she told us that to be a doctor, you don't have to have a large office full of equipment and staff. To be a doctor and to practice, you need I think she said, a blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, and a scale. I mean, you might throw in a flashlight, a otoscope with that also, but it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, you need a handful of equipment, and you don't need to complicate things with being on every insurance or that kind of thing. She gave us a lecture saying that you can make things very simple. And that kind of stuck with me, even though it took me years to get to the point of actually following that advice. One thing I did, I worked with a doctor actually during residency in the late 90s. Actually, I worked for two different doctors for house call companies.
Okay.
And that was a really great experience. And I think it went along with that same philosophy of being able to see a patient with what you can carry in a bag. And I don't think I always had that traditional doctor bag. I used a backpack or something, but but you can have a medical practice with nothing more than what you can stuff into a bag that you carry in one hand.
Well, that's amazing. So you're essentially saying, like, keep it simple. You don't have to complicate things and buy fancy hair removal laser machines that cost $30,000.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember when I was working in the hospital, I met this dermatologist. It was this woman, and she had a big pin on her white coat that said the Laser Queen. And
Okay.
this was during the time that I had that machine.
Right.
And I talked to her, and she said that she just bought a laser that can remove hair so effectively that she sells 3 treatment packages, and people often want their money back because the hair never grows back after the second treatment.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow. And she, you could tell, I could tell like she could probably afford whatever machine she wanted and keep up with the latest technology. And I thought, well,
Right.
I'm never going to keep up with that with my little machine that, when I bought it, they said, tell people to plan for 6 treatments. And then after I bought it, they said, well, maybe it's more like 12 treatments. Uh,
Wow.
and I think it's as many treatments as it takes for the patient to get sick of coming back and, giving up on it.
Right.
So yeah, definitely don't buy overpriced machines, and
Hmm.
in many cases we're just never going to keep up with the newest stuff. You see that with ophthalmologists also with those LASIK procedures.
Right.
They're never going to have the best machines in their office. So it's a little scary going to someone that does that treatment in their own office.
Hmm.
Cosmetics in general. But yeah, I mean, as far as I kind of have that philosophy now. As far as I think of myself as doing house calls in my own office.
Right.
I don't have a lot of equipment. I do have equipment. I mean, actually, some things that I got from my dad's practice. Some of the stuff I should probably update too. I have a otoscope, ophthalmoscope, wall-mounted that's from the '80s that I had somebody fix up. It works well enough. Um,
Right.
the blood pressure cuff on the wall. We have a scale, but I also have equipment that I could throw in a bag. My reflex hammer and portable otoscope, ophthalmoscope, stethoscope.
Hmm.
I have a little blood pressure machine, but I also have the portable cuff. With the spring-loaded meter on it, and
Right.
you. So I
So
mean, you
it
should
doesn't
always,
take much.
yeah. I mean, I think at least for me, it makes sense to kind of always think of, even in my own office, that I'm doing a house call, and I shouldn't require anything more than what I could throw into a bag.
Right.
Even if I don't bring all that stuff home with me every day, if I had to, I could. Um, and some people going into these kind of small practices where you're trying to keep the overhead low, you might start out by sharing space with someone. You might rent space, in another doctor's office. Um, maybe even a chiropractor, a podiatrist, an acupuncturist,
Hmm.
someone in a field where, you're not directly competing with them because they probably wouldn't want you in the office then. But, you can, at one point there was an acupuncturist that was going to rent me a room in his office for a few days a week, for I think like $200 or $300 a month. $200 a month is a lot better than $3,000 a month.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but in that situation where you're using a room in someone else's office, I mean, you almost are doing a house call within someone's office. I mean, you
Right.
kind of have to be prepared to, keep everything you need in a bag and bring it home with you when you're done.
Hmm.
So the house call experience was definitely good training for that.
Right. To just be able to go up and move at any time and keep everything in one place.
Yeah, definitely.
You had spoken to me earlier about your some sort of programming. Someone had given you advice on programming during your medical training.
Oh yeah. So that was kind of my other big interest in early on was programming. I've always done well with it. I took a couple of programming classes in school, and um, I think if I hadn't gone to medical school, that's what I would have gone into.
Okay.
But yeah, like I think early on when I first got married, but I was still working in that big clinic. One of my patients was a psychologist, and he was also a programmer,
Okay.
and I kind of got into really learning programming kind of late. I think I was in my 30s already,
Mm-hmm.
and I just found it really interesting. Started reading a lot of books and practicing,
Mm-hmm.
and so one day I met this psychologist, and we're in the room talking, and he told me that he had tried starting a software company with a partner, but he said, just always think of like what you're doing in your practice of what kind of problems could be solved with software.
Right.
And you'll just come up with all kinds of ideas for things, for programs you can write.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I did that. I think I started out with a package. It was called Borland C++.
Okay.
It was like a kind of a graphical thing where you could like kind of lay out the windows in the program graphically, and then do the programming to give all the little buttons and widgets functionality.
Okay.
And so I wrote a program early on that I tried using within that practice where I was, and they told me at first, they said, you have to handwrite your notes, you can't use software, and then they finally gave in. They said, as long as you use this paper that we have in our charts, if you can print to that paper just as if you had handwritten it, keep everything on this one side of the paper where we write, and so I actually got this program to fit all those specifications, and I started printing all my notes, and
Wow.
Actually, one of the doctors got mad at me, and because he would
Because
sit
you were
there.
more efficient.
Yeah. I mean, he took long, a long time to write these long, detailed pages of notes, and
Right.
Suddenly I was like printing out, just as detailed notes easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, I liked using that program, but it just seemed kind of limited, and
Right.
so then I found out that online I found this project called OpenEMR.
Okay.
And I kind of joined early. I think it was around that 2003 or 2004.
Okay.
And it was kind of primitive at that time. But I got interested in it. It was kind of good practice to learn things in programming. I was learning like different languages. Like it's written in a language called PHP,
Okay.
which is a language that's still very popular now.
Mm-hmm.
WordPress, which is what we all use to build websites now for marketing,
Right.
is written in PHP.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so and there were some other languages involved. There was one called Perl, JavaScript, which is also pretty important these days if you do web developing.
Right.
So I got really involved with the OpenEMR project, and kind of modified it. Early on I helped out a lot. I did a lot of contributing to the project, and fixed some bugs, and added some features, and but after a while I came up with an idea for a module for it that could kind of do everything, kind of like an all-in-one module in the middle of the program.
Okay.
And and I worked on it little by little, and so when I came around to going into practice for myself in 2006 initially,
Mm-hmm.
At that point I started really working on that project to get it to a point where I could use it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, even though during that time from 2006 until now, I did end up going back to work for other people. In those jobs, I've always made sure that I could use my own software, because I've kind of evolved it to a point where it's incredibly efficient, and I'm able to document very quickly and very thoroughly. Just things like prescription printing. It keeps track of orders, and
Wow.
really incredible software. It's kind of evolved with me, over the last decade. And when I find myself doing something repeatedly and over and over again, I eventually I'll commit myself, like I'll write a list of changes and features that I need, and eventually I'll sit down and just work on it until I get it done.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's something and because I kind of wanted to go into programming early on.
Right.
I've kind of found a way to combine the thing I wanted.
Programming and the medicine.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out that the medical field is like an incredible problem area, with a lot of things to work on and solve,
Yeah,
in the
definitely.
programming area. And one interesting thing with that is that over the years, as I've used OpenEMR and my own software embedded it in modules with it, when I hear people complain about medical software, I've heard of people quitting institutions because they couldn't work with the EMRs anymore.
Right.
And, when I hear that hospitals have to hire scribes to document for the doctors because the software is so difficult to use, it's I can't even relate to that because
Because yours is just so efficient and easy to use.
yeah, I mean there's a learning curve to it. I mean it's kind of evolved.
It's like any
with
EMR,
me.
though.
Yeah, but it's and it works differently than I mean, I kind of there's one part of it I really like that there's a search box where you're actually searching for data that you've used with past patients. So you're able to say that for example, when I used to work at the clinic early on, we used to carry these little prescribing manuals around with us everywhere. You have someone come in for something, you have to prescribe a treatment that, maybe you don't use that often. I'd find myself looking up the same things over and over and over again. And I know a lot of EMRs these days, they have these places where you can look things up. Mm-hmm. But, my system, I'm looking up things that I've done myself. I'm not looking up in a manual or a guide. I'm doing searches to, say that I prescribed a medication like once in the last year. Mm-hmm. I can type a few characters and bring that up and like, oh, that's how you do it. That's how I did it last time.
So Mark, with this open EMR system, are you selling it? Is it a software that if someone was interested in looking into, they could contact you, or is it just kind of your own thing?
I have set it up for some people. So it is something I do on a very limited basis as a kind of a separate business. As far as I don't actually sell the software because it's open source, meaning that it's free.
Right.
So when I add stuff to it, even if it's things I haven't contributed back to the community, mm-hmm. it's still part of an open source product. But I am able to, as a business, do support and set up the installations for people and help them and develop specific features that they need.
Wow.
And customize it. So I've done that for a few people. There's one guy one doctor that asked me. He called me and he said that he had used the system in another doctor's office where I had set it up, and he asked me to come set it up in his office. So I came over and I installed it and I customized it, set it up for his desktop and his computer and printer. And by the way, it's because it's based on web server technology. You can run it on one machine, or you can distribute it to multiple machines in an office. Wow. It doesn't require an internet connection, but it's also possible to run it over the internet if you need to. So it's kind of, you can kind of expand or scale it up as much as you need to.
Interesting.
But I remember when I finally got it running on this guy's desktop, he said, "Oh, there's that search box that I love. There's the thing I need there." And
so it has features that are definitely, not present in the common EMRs you see in medical practices. And
it's unique because it's extremely thoroughly tested by me being a doctor. Yeah. There's a saying in the software industry that programmers should eat their own dog food. And what they mean is that they should use their own software.
Right.
And when a company is designing something like an email client, that's easy. Everybody can use that. So, mm-hmm. Say at Apple and Microsoft, when they develop an email program, the CEO can say, well, everybody in the company has to use our email program because we have to see how it works for our customers.
Right.
With an EMR company, that's not the same because they can't really afford to employ an army of doctors to try out their software. I mean, they do. They pay. That's why these programs cost millions of dollars to mm-hmm. develop. Because they do have to consult with doctors and get feedback from doctors. But you can't really have the programmers using the software because there's not that many companies that are employing doctors who are programmers.
Wow.
Generally in the software field, they would rather us doctors keep to working on our charts and seeing patients and doing our, what we do, and they'll do what they do. But you don't really have that situation where they can eat their own dog food, where they can go use the software on their own because they're not seeing patients.
Right.
My software is like very highly optimized for actually doing real work and seeing real patients, and so I love using it myself. I don't think I can even the couple of occasions where it wasn't working and I had to handwrite things or use something else, I almost couldn't do it. And I did look at another free product, a product that doesn't cost any money.
Okay.
I can't remember the name. It's a web-based EMR that's free. But I tried it and it was very inefficient and difficult to use.
But what you're saying is if someone did want to open up their own practice, it's not impossible to get very efficient EMR for free or like cheap?
Yeah, you can actually get OpenEMR. There's some other similar programs, but some of them are actually based on OpenEMR. Over the years, some other open source projects have forked off from that project, and there's other solutions. One thing I like about OpenEMR is the fact that it uses those common web-based technologies like PHP, JavaScript.
Right.
So if you did need to hire a programmer, there's a much larger pool than, for example, I think you can get an open source version of the Vista program that they use in the VA clinics and VA hospitals.
Okay.
But that runs on a kind of an outdated.
In a more difficult language.
Yeah, I think it's called mumps. I think it's a language that's very difficult. It's outdated. There's not a lot of programmers that know how to program in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you don't have that pool of pretty much. I mean, you can. There's a website, I think Upwork.com, where you can go hire programmers if you needed one, and you can easily find a programmer that's very good at PHP and JavaScript and
can
those
help you if you have any issues with your own EMR.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one of the things with open source is that, people hear free and they think, free means it doesn't cost money.
Right.
And it doesn't. I mean, you can download the software for free and use it for free.
Right.
But, when you get to a point where if you're not a programmer and you need it customized in some way, or you need, help getting it set up or help using it, it's not always free in the sense of not costing money, but it's free in the sense of freedom. Like you're not tied in with one vendor.
Yeah.
If you hire a vendor, you could hire a large company maybe that supports it. But if you're not happy with them, you can go to another one, or you can hire a programmer. You have that freedom where you own your own data. I mean, some of these systems online, there's this free system that's pretty popular. You go online and you enter all your data, and they do e-prescribing, and you can integrate your labs, and it seems like a great system, but when you think about it, where's all your patients' data? It's on their computer somewhere, and you don't really have full control of it. You almost don't even own your own charts.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, for open source software, it gives you that freedom, meaning like you own your software, you own your you own your code, you own your data, and you have complete control of it. So yeah, that's something that people can look up, OpenEMR, and they can download the software and try it today. It's completely free to use and try out, and
that's fantastic.
I mean, open source software is really a great field by itself.
Right, and I think that's something that if people are interested, and we were discussing earlier low overhead costs, if people are interested in creating their own system, their own practice, their own anything, that would be a huge issue if you couldn't, design or have a good EMR system. So just the fact that, you've opened my eyes that there is an option even within the EMR to keep overhead low, and if you need to tailor your EMR to kind of your own needs, you can get a programmer probably significantly cheaper to customize it. So that's good as a student, and as someone who is interested maybe in the future to have my own practice, to know.
When I actually got started, even though I knew some programming, when I first opened my practice in 2006, I was doing a lot of stuff with organizing the office, and I didn't have a lot of time to play around with the software. So I did pay a guy in California that he has a company that specifically administers OpenEMR. He sets it up for hospitals and clinics in California, and he set up a what's called a virtual machine, a kind of a computer inside of the computer, and set up the full system for me the way I wanted it, and sent me a link. I downloaded it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I actually ran his system as is without modifying it for a few months, until I had time to start working on my own stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you can do stuff like that. Basically, I mean, it's incredible, and it's much more flexible. And another good thing is, I used to work at a place where their Comcast internet connection kept going down.
Okay.
And they actually were subscribing to a prescription system. They had these special thermal printers that would print out prescriptions.
Okay.
And, my software did the same thing. I could print prescriptions, but I didn't need any special printers or thermal paper. I could print to the, actual real prescription pads.
Right.
So one day, actually not one day, a few times their internet went down, and I was still going along working in my office, and they finally canceled their subscription.
Right.
I was still up and running when the internet went down because I didn't depend on that.
Because it wasn't based off of the internet.
Yeah, it was on a local computer in the office.
Right. Well, that's amazing. With that being said, Mark, I think I'm all out of questions here. Did you have any closing remarks before we wind up this episode?
Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is marketing. When people open their own office and they think, well, I'll bring the patients with me from my previous practice. When you get a job, think about look carefully at your contract that you're going to sign. Maybe pay a lawyer to look it over with you, and look carefully at the non-compete clause in your contract, and make sure that one day when you decide to leave them, that you're not signing away your life, that you're able to actually go and open your own office. And if your patients contact you, are you even allowed to see them?
Mm-hmm.
How far away do you have to open up?
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, people will even tell you when you're signing a contract, don't worry about the non-compete clause. We can't even enforce it. And that's not necessarily true. They can be enforced.
Okay.
So be careful when you sign contracts if you do start out getting a job.
Right. If it's written, it's there for a reason. Yeah,
and it's good to, everywhere that I've worked, I've always made myself available. I give the patients my phone number.
Right.
They can contact me, and so when I did leave, various jobs, they were able to find me.
Okay.
I made sure I had a website that information was correct out there online. There's various, when you look up doctors, there's different services that give information on doctors.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that all of that information is correct, and people, when they look for you, they find you and not the last place you worked at.
Right. So you're saying if you wanted to develop a following over time, no matter what you're doing, you would have a way for them to connect with you and have the correct information, such as a website in your case.
Yeah, and it's good to start early as far as things like blogging. I think a lot of doctors are afraid to blog. They're afraid to say anything and put anything out there. But people shouldn't be afraid of that. I mean, we should be able to speak and to write and communicate our feelings and ideas and thoughts. But I mean that's a big part of how people market now is
Right.
Creating content like articles and podcasts and websites.
Mm-hmm.
If you just one day make a website and put it out there, it's kind of like sticking a little sign in the ground. I mean, almost no one's going to see it.
Yeah.
So people should think about how does marketing work these days? Because if you go out on your own and you open an office, you rent a space and put up a website, you could sit there and have nobody walk in the door. So
Right.
when you get a job and you work for someone, you're basically going to work for somebody that knows how to market better than you do because they have patience.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't depend on other people to reach out and market to patients. I mean, that's something that you always have to keep in mind. Like, how do you get a following? How do you get patients to be aware of who you are and what you do
Right.
different? How you're different. That you're someone that they can get in touch with and talk to for an hour if they need to. And
you just opened up Pandora's box with a whole nother idea of maybe a future episode where we talk specifically about marketing or, with someone who's more of an expert in that area. Because, you and I can agree, we aren't taught business or marketing in school. So, which is unfortunate.
We're trained to get a job, basically.
Yes. So instead of having, the freedom of developing ourselves as an individual. So, with that being said, Mark, I thank you sincerely. It's absolutely great to hear from a happy physician who's currently practicing, who has great tips and things to avoid. And I'm going to have to digest this and, summarize it and use this information for my own good. And I hope others listening will also take in the great wisdom that you've shared today. So
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, Mark. And there you have it, folks. That's the episode for today. I also want you to visit www.thehappydoc.weebly.com so that you can gain more information, and so you can also ask questions directly to the interviewee that we just had on this episode. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.